Margaret sat at the dining table, staring at the strange bowl in front of her. The smell hit her first. Something fishy but wrong, like food that had been sitting too long in the sun. She was 83 years old, and in all her years she had never encountered anything quite like this. Her daughter-in-law Claire placed the bowl down with a satisfied smile. "There you go, Grandma Margaret. Fresh and nutritious, just what the doctor ordered." Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. Margaret picked up the spoon, feeling its weight in her weathered hands. She had lived through rationing during the war, had eaten simple meals her entire life, had made do with whatever the sea provided to her fishing family. But this was different. The first taste made her stomach turn. It was thick, pasty with an artificial flavor that coated her tongue. She forced herself to swallow, then carefully set the spoon down. "How is it?" Claire asked, not really waiting for an answer as she turned back to loading the dishwasher. "Fine, dear," Margaret replied quietly, glancing over at the corner where Buster, Claire's prize golden retriever, was enthusiastically eating from his bowl. The contents looked remarkably similar to what sat before her. Margaret had moved in with her son David and his wife Claire 6 months ago, after a fall in her own cottage left her with a broken wrist and her doctor insisting she needed help. David had been so caring, so insistent that she come stay with them in their beautiful house overlooking the harbor. Claire had smiled and nodded, saying all the right things about wanting to take care of family, but something had felt off from the beginning. The small room they'd given her in the back of the house, barely larger than a closet. The way Claire's smile never quite reached her eyes. The subtle comments about Margaret's age, her forgetfulness, her burden on their busy lives. "You know, Grandma," Claire said now, wiping her hands on a dish towel, "at your age, it's really important to get proper nutrition. This meal is specially formulated for optimal health." Margaret nodded, taking another small bite. She noticed Claire never ate with her anymore, always claiming she'd eaten earlier or was on some new diet. And David was away so often now, his marine research taking him out to sea for weeks at a time. After Claire left the kitchen, Margaret sat alone with her thoughts. She looked again at Buster's bowl, then at her own. The resemblance was unmistakable. But surely she was mistaken. Surely her own family wouldn't. She took the bowl to the sink and scraped most of the contents into the garbage disposal, keeping just enough so Claire wouldn't notice. Then she went to her small room and sat on the narrow bed, her mind racing. Margaret might be old, but she wasn't stupid. She'd raised 4 children, run a household, managed the books for David's father's fishing business for 30 years. Her mind was as sharp as ever, even if her body had slowed down. Over the next few days she began to pay closer attention. She watched Claire prepare her meals, always when David wasn't home. She noticed the way Claire would open cans or packages away from view, then transfer the contents to regular serving dishes. She observed how Buster would sit expectantly near Margaret during mealtimes, as if hoping for scraps of familiar food. The breakthrough came when Margaret pretended to be napping one afternoon. Claire was on the phone in the kitchen, her voice carrying down the hallway. "No, Mother, she doesn't suspect anything. She's really starting to lose it, you know? Yesterday she asked me 3 times what day it was. It's actually perfect timing. The insurance company would never question anything now." Margaret's blood ran cold. Insurance company? What did that mean? She waited until Claire left for her weekly art class, then made her way carefully to the kitchen. In the recycling bin she found what she was looking for, an empty can with a picture of a golden retriever on the label. "Premium Canine Nutrition," it read. "For active adult dogs." Margaret's hand shook as she held the can. They were actually feeding her dog food. Her own family was feeding her dog food and making her think it was normal human food. But why? Was this some sick joke? Or was there something more sinister happening? She thought about Claire's phone conversation. The insurance. Margaret owned several properties around town, including the cottage where she'd lived for 40 years, and a small apartment building her late husband had left her. If something happened to her, if she was declared incompetent or... Margaret forced herself to stop that train of thought. She needed to be smart about this. If she confronted them directly, they could easily claim she was confused, that her age was making her paranoid. She needed proof. Over the following week, Margaret began what she privately called her investigation. She started taking photos with her old phone whenever she could do so safely. Pictures of the dog food cans in the recycling. Pictures of her meals next to Buster's bowl. She even managed to take a video of Claire preparing one of her special meals by watching through the crack in the kitchen door. She also began keeping notes, hidden in an old recipe book she'd brought from her cottage. Dates, times, what she was served, Claire's comments and behavior. She documented everything. The hardest part was continuing to eat the food. She managed by taking just a few bites during each meal, then disposing of the rest when Claire wasn't looking. She told herself it was only temporary, until she figured out what to do. Margaret also started playing up her supposed confusion. If Claire believed she was losing her mental faculties, Margaret would give her what she expected to see. She began asking repeated questions, pretending to forget conversations, acting more frail than she actually felt. "Oh dear," she would say, looking around the kitchen with a puzzled expression. "I thought I just ate lunch, but was that yesterday? I'm getting so mixed up lately." Claire would exchange meaningful looks with David when he was home, whispering about Margaret's decline, when they thought she couldn't hear. But Margaret could hear everything. Her hearing was perfect, and she began listening carefully to all their conversations. She learned that they were in significant debt. David's research grant had been cut, and Claire's art gallery was failing. They'd been using Margaret's Social Security checks to help pay their mortgage, telling her it was for her room and board. Most disturbing of all, she overheard Claire on the phone with someone, discussing timeline, and how much longer this can go on. The implications made Margaret's stomach turn with something far worse than dog food. One evening, as Margaret sat in her small room pretending to read, she made a decision. She wasn't going to be a victim. She'd spent her whole life taking care of others, solving problems, standing up for what was right. Just because she was old didn't mean she was helpless. She had 3 things in her favor that Claire didn't know about. First, her mind was completely clearer than it had been in months, actually, now that she was paying attention to everything around her. Second, she had resources Claire wasn't aware of, including savings accounts and investments her late husband had set up years ago. And third, she had family who actually cared about her. Margaret's granddaughter Emma lived 2 hours away and called every Sunday like clockwork. Emma was a lawyer, sharp and determined, with her grandmother's strong will and her grandfather's sense of justice. If anyone could help Margaret navigate this situation, it was Emma. But first, Margaret needed more evidence. She needed to be absolutely certain of what was happening and why. Because once she set her plan in motion, there would be no going back. As she lay in bed that night, listening to Claire and David's muffled voices through the thin walls, Margaret felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. For the first time since moving into this house, she felt like herself again. Tomorrow, she would begin gathering the proof she needed. And then when the time was right, she would show them exactly what happened when someone underestimated an old woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The dog food scandal was just the beginning. Margaret had a feeling that once she started digging, she would uncover far more than just dietary deception. And whatever she found, she was going to make sure Claire and David faced the consequences of treating family like a burden to be disposed of. Her last thought before falling asleep was of her late husband, who used to say that the strongest storms often came from the quietest skies. Claire had no idea what kind of storm was building. The next morning, Margaret woke with a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in months. She lay in bed for a few extra minutes, listening to the sounds of the house, Claire's high heels clicking on the hardwood floors, David's deep voice as he talked on the phone about his research schedule. Everything sounded normal, domestic, peaceful. No one would suspect that beneath this ordinary morning routine, Margaret was planning their downfall. She got dressed slowly, deliberately, making sure to appear frail and confused when she emerged from her room. In the kitchen, Claire was already preparing what she called Margaret's morning nutrition. "Good morning, Grandma Margaret," Claire said with that practiced smile. "How did you sleep?" "Oh, I'm not sure, dear," Margaret replied, adding a slight tremor to her voice. "Did I eat dinner last night? I can't quite remember." Claire's eyes lit up with satisfaction. "Yes, you did. You had a lovely meal. Don't worry about forgetting. It happens to everyone your age." Margaret nodded meekly and accepted the bowl Claire placed before her. It smelled like the same fishy, artificial concoction as always. She took a small bite, chewed thoughtfully, then smiled. Delicious. You're such a good cook, Claire. The moment Claire left the kitchen, Margaret carefully scraped most of the food into a small container she'd hidden in her pocket. She would need samples for testing later. She'd already researched veterinary labs online using the library computer during one of her supposed confusion walks around town. Over the following days, Margaret perfected her act. She would stand in doorways looking lost, ask the same questions multiple times, and occasionally call Claire by the wrong name. Each confused episode made Claire more confident, more careless. She's really going downhill fast, Margaret heard Claire tell someone on the phone. The doctor said this could happen quickly at her age. We might need to look into memory care facilities soon. Memory care facilities. Margaret felt a chill run through her. She understood now, this wasn't just about humiliation or saving money on food. They were building a case to have her declared incompetent. Once that happened, they could control her finances, her property, her entire life. Margaret began her real investigation that afternoon. While Claire was at her weekly massage appointment, Margaret made her way to the home office David and Claire shared. She'd watched them enter the security code for the computer several times, pretending to be confused about where the bathroom was located. The computer revealed everything Margaret suspected and more. There were emails between Claire and a lawyer discussing guardianship procedures. Documents showing that David and Claire had already obtained power of attorney over Margaret's checking account, something she didn't remember signing. Financial records showing they'd been draining her Social Security payments and even taking small amounts from her savings. Most damning of all, she found a detailed timeline in Claire's digital calendar. Phase 1. Establish confusion patterns. Phase 2. Document incidents. Phase 3. Medical evaluation. Phase 4. Guardianship filing. They had been planning this for months, maybe even before Margaret's fall. The accident might have been convenient timing, but this scheme had been in motion long before that. Margaret photographed everything she could, using her phone to capture screen images when she couldn't figure out how to save files. She also discovered that Claire had been ordering the dog food online in bulk, using Margaret's own credit card to pay for it. The receipts were all there, hidden in a folder labeled Household Expenses. But Margaret's most important discovery came when she found correspondence with Margaret's insurance company. Claire had been calling regularly, asking about the procedures for filing claims related to cognitive decline and accidental injury. She'd even inquired about the payout timeline for life insurance policies. Life insurance. Margaret sat back in the desk chair feeling sick. They weren't just planning to rob her. They were planning for her death. That evening, Margaret called her granddaughter Emma from the phone in her room, keeping her voice low. Emma, sweetheart, it's Grandma. I need your help with something, but I need you to listen carefully and not react strongly. Of course, Grandma. What's wrong? Margaret told Emma everything. The dog food, the financial manipulation, the guardianship plans, the insurance inquiries. Emma's legal training kicked in immediately. Grandma, this is elder abuse and it's serious. We need to get you out of there and build a case. Can you continue gathering evidence for a few more days without arousing suspicion? I can do whatever needs to be done, Margaret replied firmly. I've been playing the confused old lady quite well, actually. Emma's laugh was grim. I should have known. You're tougher than any of us realized. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Over the next week, Emma coached Margaret through evidence collection like a detective training an undercover agent. Margaret learned to photograph documents at angles that captured the date stamps and headers. She figured out how to forward emails to a secret account Emma had set up for her. She even managed to record some of Claire's phone conversations using her smartphone's voice memo function. The most challenging part was continuing to eat the dog food while maintaining her confused persona. Margaret had researched the health effects online and knew that while unpleasant and potentially harmful long-term, small amounts wouldn't kill her immediately. She forced herself to take a few bites of each meal, then disposed of the rest in increasingly creative ways, flushing it down the toilet, burying it in the garden when Claire wasn't looking, even feeding some to neighborhood cats who seemed to enjoy it more than she did. Margaret also began testing Claire's reactions to different levels of confusion. Some days she would seem relatively clear, other days completely lost. She noticed that Claire became agitated when Margaret appeared too competent, but relaxed when she seemed helpless. "I think she's having more bad days than good ones now," Claire told David one evening, not knowing Margaret was listening from the hallway. "Dr. Peterson said we should document everything. I've been keeping a journal of her episodes." A journal. Margaret realized Claire was creating her own evidence file, documenting Margaret's supposed decline to support the guardianship petition. Every time Margaret pretended to be confused, Claire was writing it down as proof of incompetence. The irony wasn't lost on Margaret. While Claire was documenting fake confusion, Margaret was documenting real abuse. Emma visited the following weekend, ostensibly for a casual family visit. She brought her boyfriend Jake, who worked as a private investigator, and who spent the visit taking discreet photographs and noting details about the house, the dog food setup, and Claire's behavior. "Your grandmother seems to be having some difficult days," Claire told Emma during dinner, speaking about Margaret as if she weren't sitting right there. "She gets confused about where she is sometimes, forgets conversations we just had. It's heartbreaking, really." "I can imagine how hard this must be for you," Emma replied sympathetically, while her foot pressed against Margaret's under the table, their signal that the recording app on Emma's phone was running. Claire launched into a detailed account of Margaret's supposed symptoms, unknowingly creating a recording that directly contradicted the medical timeline she and David had established with their lawyer. Emma kept her expression neutral and supportive, occasionally asking questions that prompted Claire to reveal more details about their plans. After Emma left, Margaret felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. She had an ally who understood both the legal implications and the emotional stakes. But Claire seemed to sense that something had shifted. She became more suspicious, more controlling. She started locking doors that had previously been open, including the office where Margaret had been conducting her research. She also began staying home more often, making it harder for Margaret to move around freely. "We need to be extra careful with Grandma," Margaret heard Claire tell David. "I think she might be more aware than she lets on sometimes. We can't take any chances now." Margaret realized her window for evidence gathering was closing. Claire was becoming paranoid, and that made her dangerous. Margaret needed to accelerate her timeline. She spent one entire afternoon photographing every financial document she could find, including bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals and credit card bills, revealing the dog food purchases. She also managed to copy the lawyer's contact information from Claire's phone when Claire left it unattended during a shower. Most importantly, Margaret gathered samples of the dog food itself, along with photos of the cans and the packaging. Emma had arranged for independent testing through her law firm's contacts, and the results would provide scientific proof of what Margaret had been forced to consume. The final piece of evidence came unexpectedly. Margaret was in her room one evening when she heard Claire on the phone with someone, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. "No, we can't wait any longer. She's getting suspicious, and that granddaughter of hers is asking too many questions. We need to move to the next phase now." Margaret's heart pounded as she pressed her ear to the door. "Yes, I understand the risks, but we don't have a choice. If she starts talking to the wrong people, everything falls apart. The evaluation needs to happen this week." Evaluation. Margaret knew exactly what that meant. The medical evaluation that would declare her incompetent and trigger the guardianship filing. Once that happened, she would lose all control over her life and finances. She had run out of time. Whatever Emma was planning, it needed to happen immediately. Margaret went to her small desk and pulled out the notebook where she'd been keeping her real records. Not the fake confused observations Claire was documenting, but a detailed timeline of the abuse, the financial manipulation, and the conspiracy to steal her life. At the top of a fresh page she wrote, "Day of reckoning tomorrow." It was time to stop being the victim and start being the prosecutor. Margaret woke before dawn, her mind crystal clear and her resolve unshakable. Today would be the day everything changed. She had spent weeks gathering evidence, playing the role of a confused old woman while Claire and David plotted her downfall. Now it was time to turn the tables. Emma had called the night before with news that made Margaret's pulse quicken. "The lab results came back, Grandma. What they've been feeding you isn't just dog food. It's a high-end formula that's actually dangerous for elderly humans to consume regularly." The preservatives and protein levels could cause serious kidney damage over time. We have them on elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy charges. But Margaret had insisted on doing this her way. I want them to see it coming, she had told Emma. I want them to understand exactly how badly they've miscalculated. The opportunity came sooner than expected. David announced at breakfast that his research partner Dr. Harrison would be joining them for dinner that evening, along with Claire's sister Rebecca and her husband. Claire was delighted. She loved showing off their beautiful home and playing the devoted caregiver. It'll be a lovely evening, Claire said, already planning the menu. Dr. Harrison is so distinguished, and Rebecca hasn't seen the house since we renovated. We'll have Grandma Margaret eat in her room, of course. She gets confused around company. Margaret nodded meekly. Of course, dear. I wouldn't want to embarrass anyone. But Margaret had no intention of hiding in her room. She spent the day making final preparations, charging her phone, organizing her evidence folder, and most importantly calling Emma. Tonight, Margaret said simply, come for dinner. Bring Jake and anyone else you trust. It's time. Emma's voice was tight with concern. Are you sure you're ready for this, Grandma? Once we do this, there's no going back. I've been ready for weeks, Margaret replied. I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. As evening approached, Claire bustled around the kitchen preparing an elaborate meal. Margaret watched from the doorway as Claire opened multiple cans of gourmet food for the dinner guests, while simultaneously opening a can of dog food for Margaret's special meal. The guests began arriving at 6. Dr. Harrison was a pompous man who clearly enjoyed being treated as an important academic. Rebecca and her husband Tom seemed nice enough, though they barely acknowledged Margaret when Claire introduced her as David's confused mother. Emma arrived with Jake and, to Margaret's surprise, 2 other people she didn't recognize, a woman with a professional camera and a man in a neat suit carrying a briefcase. I hope you don't mind, Emma said to Claire. I brought my friend Sarah, who's a journalist. She's doing a piece on families caring for elderly relatives. And this is Mr. Chun from the district attorney's office. He's consulting on elder care legal issues. Claire's face went pale, but she couldn't refuse without seeming rude. Of course, the more the merrier. Dinner began normally enough. Claire served her carefully prepared salmon to the guests while Margaret sat at the far end of the table with her usual bowl of what looked like fish pâté. She noticed Dr. Harrison glancing at her meal with a puzzled expression. That's an interesting preparation, he said to Claire. What kind of fish is that? Oh, it's a special blend, Claire replied quickly. Grandma Margaret has very specific dietary needs due to her condition. Margaret had been taking small bites of the dog food, playing her role perfectly. But now, with all eyes on her, she slowly set down her spoon and looked directly at Dr. Harrison. Doctor, she said, her voice suddenly clear and strong, in your professional opinion, what would happen if an elderly person consumed high-protein canine nutrition formula on a daily basis for several months? The table went completely silent. Dr. Harrison blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, what did you say? Margaret smiled and picked up the empty can she'd hidden beside her chair, the same brand Claire had used to prepare her meal. She placed it on the table where everyone could see the label clearly. I asked about the health effects of feeding dog food to humans. Claire shot to her feet. She's having one of her episodes. She gets confused and says things that don't make sense. Do I? Margaret asked calmly. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, opening the voice recording app. Claire's voice filled the room. No, we can't wait any longer. She's getting suspicious. We need to move to the next phase now. The color drained from Claire's face. David stared at his wife in horror. But Margaret wasn't finished. She looked around the table at each shocked face. For the past 3 months, my daughter-in-law has been serving me dog food, telling me it was specially prepared human food. She and my son have been stealing from my bank accounts, planning to have me declared incompetent, and discussing my life insurance policies with considerable interest. Emma stood up and opened her own briefcase, pulling out thick folders of documents. Everything my grandmother just said is supported by extensive evidence. Bank records, emails, recorded conversations, photographs, and laboratory analysis of the food she's been forced to eat. Sarah, the journalist, had been quietly taking photos throughout Margaret's revelation. Mr. Chun from the DA's office was making notes and looking increasingly grim. Dr. Harrison examined the dog food can with disgust. This is absolutely unconscionable. The protein levels alone could cause serious organ damage in an elderly person. This isn't just abuse, it's assault. Claire tried desperately to salvage the situation. You don't understand. She forgets things, she gets confused. We were just trying to make sure she got proper nutrition. By feeding her dog food? Rebecca interrupted, staring at her sister in shock. Claire, what is wrong with you? Margaret stood slowly, her back straight and her voice steady. I'm not confused, Claire. I never was. I've been documenting everything you've done to me. Every theft, every humiliation, every plan you made to steal my life. She turned to address the entire table. 3 months ago I fell and broke my wrist. My son David offered to let me stay here while I recovered. I thought I was coming to a loving home where family would care for me. Instead, I discovered that my son and his wife saw me as a burden to be eliminated and an asset to be plundered. David finally found his voice. Mother, I didn't know about the food. I swear I didn't know. Margaret looked at him with profound sadness. You knew enough, David. You knew Claire was draining my accounts. You knew she was planning to have me declared incompetent. You may not have known about the dog food specifically, but you knew I was being mistreated. And you chose to look the other way because it benefited you financially. Emma spread more documents across the table. Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals. Credit card statements showing bulk purchases of dog food charged to Margaret's account. Email correspondence with lawyers about guardianship proceedings. Phone records of calls to insurance companies inquiring about claim procedures. Mr. Chun looked up from his notes. Mrs. Thompson, I need to inform you that based on what I've heard tonight, the district attorney's office will be filing criminal charges. Elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy, and potentially attempted murder, given the health risks of the forced consumption. Claire collapsed back into her chair, finally understanding that her carefully constructed plan had completely unraveled. This is insane. She's an old woman. Who's going to believe Dash? Everyone, Margaret interrupted firmly. Everyone is going to believe me because I have proof of everything. Unlike you, I didn't underestimate my opponent. Rebecca was crying now, clearly devastated by her sister's actions. Claire, how could you do this? To family. She was going to die anyway. Claire exploded, her mask finally slipping completely. She's old, she's expensive, and she was just going to be a burden for years. We have our own lives to think about. The room erupted in shocked gasps. Even David recoiled from his wife's words. Margaret felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. After months of pretending to be weak and confused, she was finally herself again, strong, clear-minded, and absolutely in control. The house you're living in, Margaret said quietly, was purchased with money my late husband and I saved for 40 years. We helped David with the down payment because we believed in family taking care of family. The mortgage you've been struggling to pay is secured against my property investments. The credit cards you've been using belong to accounts I opened and funded. She paused, letting the implications sink in. As of tomorrow morning, all of that ends. The mortgage will be called in, the credit cards will be canceled, and you'll be facing criminal charges for everything you've done. Emma added, my grandmother will be pressing full charges. This isn't a family dispute. This is a criminal case that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. David looked around the table desperately. Surely we can work something out. Mother, I know we made mistakes, but mistakes? Margaret's voice rose for the first time all evening. You fed me dog food for 3 months while planning to steal everything I own and potentially waiting for me to die. Those aren't mistakes, David. Those are crimes. Dr. Harrison stood up, clearly shaken. I need to leave. I can't be associated with this. Rebecca and Tom followed, Rebecca shooting one last horrified look at her sister before walking out. Margaret remained seated, calm in the midst of the chaos she had orchestrated. She looked at Claire and David, both of whom appeared to be in shock. I want you to understand something, Margaret said quietly. I could have confronted you weeks ago. I could have called the police the moment I realized what you were doing. But I wanted you to dig your own graves deeper. I wanted you to commit so many crimes that there would be no way to claim it was all a misunderstanding. She stood up slowly, gathering her purse and her dignity. I'm leaving now. Emma will handle the legal proceedings. You have until tomorrow to decide whether you want to fight this in court or accept whatever plea deal the prosecutor offers. As Margaret walked toward the door, Claire called out desperately, "Where will you go? You need us." Margaret turned back one last time, a slight smile on her face. "I'll be fine, dear. Unlike you, I plan for my future. I have resources you know nothing about and family who actually love me." She paused at the doorway. "Oh, and Claire? The next time you decide to treat someone like a helpless victim, make sure they actually are one. I may be old, but I'm far from helpless." With that, Margaret walked out of the house she had helped purchase, knowing she would never return. But she felt no sadness, only the satisfaction of a battle won and justice finally served. Margaret walked out into the cool evening air, breathing deeply for what felt like the first time in months. Emma was beside her, carrying Margaret's small suitcase that had been packed and ready for days. Jake followed with the boxes of evidence they'd accumulated, while Sarah and Mr. Chun discussed the legal proceedings that would begin in the morning. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Emma asked as they reached the car. "That was intense, even for you." Margaret smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm perfect, sweetheart. I finally feel like myself again." As they drove away from the house, Margaret didn't look back. That chapter of her life was over, and she had no desire to revisit it. Instead, she focused on the road ahead, both literally and figuratively. Emma had arranged for Margaret to stay with her cousin Anna, who lived in a cozy cottage about an hour away from the city. Anna had always been Margaret's favorite, a gentle soul who ran a small bakery and had never married, preferring the company of her cats and her books to the complications of romance. When they arrived at Anna's cottage, the porch light was on and Anna herself was waiting at the door, flour still dusting her apron from an evening of baking. "Aunt Margaret," Anna said, embracing her warmly, "I'm so sorry about everything you've been through, but I'm so proud of you for fighting back." The cottage smelled like fresh bread and cinnamon, a stark contrast to the sterile, artificial atmosphere of David and Claire's house. Margaret felt her shoulders relax as Anna led her to a sunny bedroom that overlooked a small garden. "I've prepared this room for you," Anna said. "It's not fancy, but it's yours for as long as you want it. I've been looking forward to having company." Margaret looked around the simple room with its handmade quilt and fresh flowers on the nightstand. "It's perfect, dear. Absolutely perfect." That night, Margaret slept better than she had in months. No one was monitoring her movements. No one was planning her downfall in whispered conversations down the hall. She was safe, she was free, and she was finally able to rest. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of legal activity. Mr. Chun from the DS office proved to be as thorough as he was determined. The charges against Claire and David included elder abuse, financial fraud, conspiracy, and attempted poisoning. The evidence Margaret had gathered was so comprehensive that their lawyers advised them to accept a plea deal rather than go to trial. Emma handled the civil proceedings with equal efficiency. She filed lawsuits to recover all the money Claire and David had stolen, plus damages for the physical and emotional harm they had caused. The house they'd been living in was put up for sale immediately, with the proceeds going back to Margaret's accounts. "They're completely ruined financially," Emma reported during one of her visits to Anna's cottage. "Claire's family has disowned her. David lost his position at the Research Institute, and they're facing significant jail time." Margaret felt no satisfaction in their destruction, only a quiet sense that justice had been served. "I don't hate them," she told Emma. "I'm just sad that it came to this." But Margaret's focus wasn't on the past, it was on building a new life. She threw herself into helping Anna with the bakery, rediscovering her love of cooking and baking that had been suppressed during those terrible months. Her hands, which had grown weak and shaky during her ordeal, regained their strength as she kneaded dough and decorated cakes. Anna's customers quickly grew to love Margaret, who had a gift for remembering their orders and their stories. Children would come in asking for Grandma Margaret's special cookies, and she would always have something fresh from the oven for them. "You've brought new life to this place," Anna told her one evening as they closed up the shop. "I didn't realize how lonely I'd been until you came." Margaret smiled, feeling useful and valued in a way she hadn't experienced in years. We're good for each other, aren't we? 3 months after leaving David's house, Margaret received a letter from him. It was handwritten, shaky, and filled with apologies and regrets. He begged for forgiveness, claiming he'd been manipulated by Claire and hadn't understood the full extent of what was happening. Margaret read the letter twice, then showed it to Emma during her next visit. "What do you want to do about this?" Emma asked. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at Anna's garden where tomatoes and herbs grew in abundance. "I want to write back," she said finally, "but not to forgive him." The letter Margaret composed was brief and to the point. She acknowledged David's apology but made it clear that forgiveness wasn't something she was prepared to offer. "You stood by while your wife fed me dog food and stole my money," she wrote. "You may not have planned it, but you allowed it to happen. That's not something a mother forgets." She ended the letter with a simple statement. "I hope you use your time in prison to think about the kind of man you want to be when you get out. But that journey is yours to take alone." Emma smiled when she read the letter. "That's exactly right, Grandma. You don't owe him anything." As autumn arrived, Margaret settled into a comfortable routine. She woke early to help Anna with the morning baking, spent afternoons tending to the garden or reading in the sunny spot by the kitchen window, and evenings chatting with Anna over dinner or watching old movies together. She also began volunteering at the local senior center, sharing her story with other elderly people who were struggling with difficult family situations. Her experience had taught her that elder abuse was far more common than most people realized, and she felt compelled to help others recognize the warning signs. "The hardest part," she would tell groups of seniors, "is admitting that your own family might be the threat. We want to trust the people we love, and that trust can make us vulnerable. But you don't have to be a victim. You have more power than you think." One afternoon, while Margaret was working in Anna's garden, she heard a car pull into the driveway. She looked up to see a familiar figure getting out. It was Rebecca, Claire's sister, looking nervous and uncertain. "Mrs. Thompson?" Rebecca called out hesitantly. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Margaret wiped her hands on her gardening gloves and walked over to the fence. "Of course, Rebecca. How are you?" "I'm okay," Rebecca said, though she clearly wasn't. "I wanted to apologize for what my sister did to you. I had no idea what was happening, and I feel terrible that I didn't see the signs." Margaret studied Rebecca's face, seeing genuine remorse and pain there. "You're not responsible for your sister's choices, dear." "I know, but I should have paid more attention. I should have visited more often, asked more questions." Rebecca's voice broke slightly. "She's my sister and I love her, but what she did to you was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," Margaret agreed quietly, "but that doesn't mean you need to carry that guilt." Rebecca nodded, tears in her eyes. "I wanted you to know that I've cut off contact with her. I can't have someone like that in my life, even if she is family. And I wanted to ask, is there anything I can do? Any way I can help make up for what happened?" Margaret considered the question. "Actually, there is something. I've been working with other seniors who've experienced abuse. We could use someone who understands the family dynamics, someone who knows how manipulation works. Would you be interested in volunteering?" Rebecca's face lit up. "Yes, absolutely. I would love to help." As Rebecca drove away that afternoon, Margaret felt a sense of completion. The circle of pain and betrayal was being transformed into something positive, something that could help others. That evening, as Margaret and Anna prepared dinner together, Anna asked, "Do you ever regret fighting back? Do you ever wish you just left quietly?" Margaret thought about the question as she stirred the soup they were making. "No," she said finally. "I spent too many years of my life making things easier for other people, even when it made things harder for me. This time I chose to stand up for myself, and it was the right choice." She paused, tasting the soup and adding a bit more salt. "Besides, if I hadn't fought back, Claire and David would have moved on to their next victim. Maybe David's aunt, or one of their elderly neighbors. Sometimes you have to make a stand not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you." Anna smiled. "You're remarkable, you know that?" "I'm just a woman who refused to be thrown away," Margaret replied. "There's nothing remarkable about demanding basic human dignity." As winter approached, Margaret received news that Claire had been sentenced to 3 years in prison, while David got 18 months. The civil lawsuit had resulted in full restitution plus damages, giving Margaret more financial security than she'd had in years. But the money wasn't what mattered most to Margaret. What mattered was the knowledge that she had fought for herself and won. What mattered was the life she was building with Anna, filled with purpose and respect and genuine affection. On Christmas Eve, as Margaret helped Anna put the finishing touches on a cake for the church bake sale, she reflected on the past year. 12 months ago, she had been trapped in a house where she was slowly being poisoned and systematically robbed. Tonight, she was surrounded by warmth and love, planning for a future that belonged entirely to her. "You know what the best part is?" Margaret said to Anna as they cleaned up the kitchen. "What's that?" "I'm not angry anymore. For months I carried so much rage about what they did to me. But somewhere along the way I let it go. Not because I forgave them, but because I realized my energy was better spent on building something new than on resenting something old." Anna hugged her. "That's the wisest thing you've ever said." As Margaret prepared for bed that night, she looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was still 83 years old, still showed the lines and marks of a long life. But her eyes were bright, her posture was strong, and her expression was peaceful. She had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger than before. She had refused to be a victim, fought for justice, and built a new life on her own terms. Most importantly, she had proven that age didn't equal helplessness, and that sometimes the quietest people could roar the loudest when pushed too far. Margaret turned off the light and settled into her comfortable bed, surrounded by the sounds of Anna's cottage, the gentle ticking of the old clock, the soft breathing of the cats, the distant sound of waves against the shore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight she was exactly where she belonged.